So today we're going to hear from our students. I suspect on all of your behalfs and the center's behalf, thank our donor for making this program possible. And today we're going to hear from, is it 6 of you or all 7 of you are here? 4, 6, 7. Can I do the count? But let me just quickly give the names. But I'm going to ask you guys to, when you come up here, please introduce yourselves, and be sure to tell everyone who you are before you begin your presentation. But without further ado, Nicholas Pilarski is going to be our first speaker today. And after all of our students have presented on their summer in India, we'll open it up to the floor for 10 or 15 minutes of questions, and you're welcome to ask any of them questions about their experience. So, Nicholas.
All right, thank you. My name is Nicholas Pallarski, and when in India, I was profiling an organization named Jana Sanskriti, and organization is probably not the best way to describe them. The best way to describe Jana Sanskriti is a movement, a cultural movement, and that was a quote that I was given. I talked to. He's one of the #1 modern Indian theater makers in the country, Ranji David, and when I asked him about Jana Sanskriti and the organization, he quickly stopped me and said, "Whoa, this is not an organization. This is a movement." So I want to go into my presentation. So it's called The Aesthetics of Change. So really quick, the Jana Sanskriti practices something called Theater of the Oppressed. So does anyone here know what Theater of the Oppressed is? Does anyone have a guess? All right, I won't pull teeth, so I'll let you know. This is by Seema Ganguly, one of the founders of Jana Sanskriti. She says, we do not create theater by the oppressed or theater for the oppressed, but rather we create theater of the oppressed. So let's unpack that. Theater by the oppressed would indicate that an NGO goes in, it has a play, and it says, for an issue, and it says, you do this play, right? We're going to teach you how to do this play, and then you're going to do this play. But it's our play. We've written it. It has a message. So it's propaganda. Theater for the Oppressed is an outside NGO coming in to an area, trying to solve a problem, and saying, here's the play on AIDS. We're going to present it to you for AIDS prevention, and you're going to see it. Whereas Theater of the Oppressed, on every single level, from the creation of the plays all the way to the performance of the plays, is made by the community. So what is Theater of the Oppressed as it pertains to Jana Sanskriti, and how has this theatrical movement affected the South 24 Parganas of West Bengal? Theater of the Oppressed was created by a practitioner named Augusto Boal. He is Brazilian, and he created it in 1971. He created it because he was creating propaganda theater. And he went into this village, and it was a revolutionary theater piece, and they brought fake guns, and they said, tear down the government. And the villagers came to him, and they said, afterwards, we'd like to talk to you. And what happened was they invited him to dinner, and then they said, we have some munitions. Let's start the revolution now. And Boal was just blown away by this. He said, whoa, this is just a play. We don't want you to actually kill anyone. We want you to, it's an allegory. So then he realized that going into these communities and giving an opinion can often be misinterpreted. So he needed to create a way where people could create their own ideas on the stage and solve problems by themselves on stage. So therefore, the basic aim of Theater of the Oppressed is to provide a megaphone for the voiceless, not give a voice to the voiceless, not tell them what to think. So Jana Sanskriti does this in a very unique way. They do this in something called form theater. Now, foreign theater is theater of the oppressed, and it was outlined by Boal, but it follows a very different structure that allows people to begin to think on their own. At first, a character comes out and says, we're going to have a performance for you, and we want you to see our material, and we want you to think about it, and then this performance is going to change a little bit. And then they present the play, and the play is extremely ambiguous. All it does is pretty much tell the social problem that is to occur. Then the play freezes. It completely stops, and a character called the Joker enters. And the Joker is kind of like this moderator, discussing with the audience, leading the audience to probably more non-violent solutions, making sure that they don't choose a violent solution to solve the problem. But it's a very hands-off approach. They're not giving answers to the community. And then they say, here's the protagonist and antagonist. I'd like you to come up on stage and replace one of these people and act and try to solve the solutions that and again, this is from the community. Everyone who's on the stage is from the community. They've created these plays. So I want you to come out and I want you to talk and replace the character and try to solve the problem at hand. And what happens is someone comes out, they act out a solution, and they investigate it on stage. And they repeat this process and repeat this process and repeat this process until a point occurs where the people begin to solve solutions in different ways. They begin to think about the problems that their community is facing in different ways, and they're trying out different solutions without any consequences. So how do you get a person who often in these communities, they're not allowed outside of their homes? Many of the women who I met with, their husbands didn't allow them to leave the homes. Husbands didn't allow them to become educated. They were being sold, they were selling their children to sex trafficking. So how do you get a person like that to come up on stage and start to speak? And you do that through the aesthetics within the play. And Jana Sanskriti, what they do is they've created a structure which is very ambiguous and creates very complex images so the person begins to think and they begin to find solutions. So here is an image of oppression, but it doesn't necessarily find any solutions. The solutions are given to the people. And what that does, it affects hunger in a different way. It affects the hunger of the mind to be able to go out and solve an issue. This is actually from a play that is about hunger, where they're in a political situation in the South Parganas right now where you have these opposing parties, political parties that are constantly feeding ideology into people's minds and saying we're going to solve this problem through this political ideology. The problem of hunger that a lot of people are facing. And this image is a pretty complex image, which is showing the ideology being shoved into someone's mouth as a way to solve hunger. But they're asking the question for people to solve this answer. Here's an image of globalization where people in the village are sold this idea of globalization, how it can be effective for them, but they can't participate in it. So it's creating a system that allows, calls for them to go in and encourages them to become part of the situation. Issues of dowry. You see in this image, you have two actors who are being split apart by a symbol of tradition, and the tradition is being shown in the form of a Bengali jatra. So how does Jana Sanskriti's staging encourage the intellectual cultivation and create personal agency? It does through during the point where they stop the play. It creates an engaging stage image where the world of the play ceases to exist and the actor directly calls for someone to help them, right? And this girl, they're doing a play on child trafficking. She literally, the play stops and she reaches out for help. And the entire play, what you see is a lot of women who who have had similar situations and they're dealing with this in their real life, they go out and they have to solve the problem. They have to help this individual on stage, and they go out and they do it. So I want to talk about the results of this. So I did a survey about gender inequality, and I asked women if they would be, if they would act as if they would go into the community and they would speak out against gender inequality. And in communities that had less than 1 year of presence, only 22% of women would go out and speak to their community, whereas after 15 years of presence in a community, it's 90%. So, I mean, that's a pretty huge difference. And it's 15 years, but I can't imagine 90% of the people in here or in my own life or myself actually being an activist for something, right? 90% of this community are being activists within their own community and bringing about change, and that's astounding. And the results, when I asked, is your community better due to the presence of form theater? And 100% of the community believes they were. So I want to tell you a quick story about two individuals. The woman on the left, her name is Bandana. She was not allowed to leave her home. She wanted to become educated. She was not allowed to be educated by her family. And after Janice Sanskriti's involvement in the community, she was able to convince her family through this dialogue that happens on stage that it was good for her to have personal agency, and it was good for her to go out into her community. And now she is an activist in her community for women's rights. And on the right-hand side, Robin, and he's in front of his home, he used to not allow his wife to leave her home. He used to, he would tell me stories about being rather brutal to her. And after the fact of seeing these forms and being involved in them, he ended up pushing for his wife to be an activist in her community for gender issues. So what this does is it really creates a forum where people can grow, and they can help their own community in a grassroots level and build their community from the bottom up. So what I want to do is share a couple images of the communities itself that Jenna Sanskriti works with, that I took. And all of these people are activists. All right, thank you very much.
Maybe I can close this down for you. So our next speaker is Rabia Mahmood. I should just tell you, because Nicholas didn't say, that you're majoring in theater arts, right? Yes. And minoring in global media studies. So I can see the obvious connection between your studies here at U of M and this particular internship and the work you did. So that's really wonderful. Our next speaker is Rabia Mahmood, who is majoring in psychology with a minor in gender and health. Rabia worked at is it pronounced the Maitri Foundation? Yeah, at the Maitri Foundation in New Delhi to study the access women have to counseling, HIV prevention programs, clinical intervention, domestic violence and prevention programs, and their ability to make organizational comparative studies. So Rabia, look forward to your presentation.
All right. Hi, everyone. As she just said right there, my name is Rabia. I'm studying psychology and gender and health here at the University of Michigan. And I don't know how to... Okay. So before I start, I just want to thank the donor, and I want to thank... Oh. Can you hear me? Okay. So before I start, I just want to thank the donor, and I also want to thank the Center for South Asian Studies and to my parents for coming here today. So While I was in India, what I was studying was HIV and AIDS, health policy and prevention, and how education relates to health-seeking behavior in terms of HIV and AIDS. So the organization that I was working for was the Maitri Foundation, which is a developmental humanitarian NGO based in New Delhi. So right off the bat, developmental humanitarian doesn't offer us a lot of specificity in terms of what they're doing. So some of the programs that they offer were domestic violence and awareness, victim support, and a victim to survivor program. So domestic violence relates a lot to the HIV and AIDS epidemic because of the way that gender inequalities intersect with the HIV and AIDS infection. So in places where there was a high amount of disadvantages based on gender or gender inequalities, prevalence was a little bit higher. Another program that they were working on was promoting the respect and support for widowed women living about 2 hours south of Delhi in a place called Vrindavan. So in this area, they had built an ashram, which is basically a place where widowed women could go and they could find residence there based in the ashram, and they could also practice a lot of spiritual things like yoga. Addition to this, they had health camps that they were having at the ashram about every week. And what they were doing was they were looking at stuff like cataracts. And for women who qualified, they could, the Maitri Foundation would actually pay for their cataract surgeries. So in addition to this, they were also improving the health and welfare for vulnerable migrant populations, including rickshaw pullers and homeless people. So this is a huge, migrant populations play a huge role in the spread of the HIV and AIDS epidemic because of the way that they're relocated only for employment purposes. So a lot of them will move from rural areas and come to urban areas based on just for employment's sake. And while they're there, they'll engage in some sort of risky sexual behavior. And then when they go back to their rural villages, they'll transmit any infections or diseases that they find to their partners or to their spouses. That's one transmission where you're moving the epidemic from urban to rural populations, and once the epidemic hits rural populations, it's a lot harder for us to combat. So they don't have as many community-based programs in rural areas of India because there are just so many. Part of my report looked at what the proportion is to rural and urban population, and about 72% of India is rural. So in addition to this, we were looking at educational opportunities for children in New Delhi. So what we were doing with that was we were working on tutoring kids every afternoon from 3 to 5. And these kids would come in from the slums. So if you ever ask them, you could really see the educational disparity with that, because if you ever ask them, what do your parents do or what do your relatives do, a lot of them would say that they're either fruit vendors or food vendors, or they're drivers or housekeepers for other people. So you can really start to see the populations that Maitri is targeting. So I'm going to talk about the HIV and AIDS awareness campaign, which is what I was really working on for the bulk of my time there. So what they had was a voluntary counseling and testing center, which was based in the Delhi-Kant area. And this is an example of the HIV test that they were using in the center. So the center was based in an area of Delhi, which was in the south, and what they were doing was they were in partnership with the Delhi Cantonment Hospital. So the hospital was located in a really kind of affluent area where basically uniformed services, people who were in the uniformed services, that's where they were living. So off the bat, you can see that there was a little bit of a disparity in people who might have access to the HIV testing and the counseling. So what I found there was that people who were coming in had a little bit higher of an education level than anyone else who might come in from rural places such as Haryana and Uttar Pradesh. So this is just a chart of education levels of people who were coming in to receive testing and counseling. And as you can see here, just to sum it up, a mean of the people coming in from April to July was people who had junior level or senior secondary level education, which is basically a 10th through 12th grade education, which could be perceived as a little bit of a higher education than people in rural areas might have access to. And in addition to this, marital status of individuals coming in for service was about 92%. So not a lot of unmarried individuals were coming in for service. The reason for this has to do a little bit with the policy that the Indian government has put in place for HIV and AIDS. So basically, any woman who's receiving antenatal care through a government-owned hospital is required to get an HIV test. So a lot of the women were coming in based on just procedural, getting it done, getting it checked off of their list so they could move on with their antenatal care. In addition to this, I was talking to a lot of the women who were coming in to the HIV and AIDS testing and counseling center, and general awareness was pretty high. A lot of them knew what HIV was, a lot of them knew how it was transmitted, but it kind of stopped there. So if you ever ask them about treatment options or how to kind of prevent it on a population-based level, nobody really had an answer. Their basic idea was that HIV equals the death. So that was something that we were looking at targeting through Maytree by kind of giving them information on what kind of treatments are available. So one of the biggest things with what I was looking at was the government policy on HIV and AIDS. So for those of you who might not know, I just have a few kind of factoids about what HIV is. To clarify, HIV is separate from AIDS. So people don't often die of HIV or AIDS. Actually, people don't die at all of HIV and AIDS. They die of opportunistic infections because their immune systems have become so compromised due to the infection. So basically, HIV, when it is introduced to the body, is attacking the white blood cells in the bloodstream. More specifically, it's attacking CD4 cells. So once CD4 count reaches a certain level, treatment is pretty necessary for survival. In this case, 200 cubic millimeters of blood, that's the CD4 count, is what you would have when you transition from HIV to AIDS. So one of the amazing, amazing policies that India has in place is that people who qualify, who have a low enough CD4 count, can get free antiretroviral drugs, which when you get those, that can really improve your mortality once you're infected with HIV and AIDS. Sorry, did I say improve? Just on life expectancy increases. So that is one of the huge things that we were looking at. And just a personal anecdote with that. The Maytree Foundation told me that when I'm going to be working in the clinic, not a lot of people are going to test positive for HIV. They probably have one person test positive in 3 months. And surprisingly enough, my first day at work, a woman came in who was really frail and just really weak. She was in the clinic with her brother, who was also just as frail, and they had both been tested positive for HIV. So she came in just as procedural to see if she could get the treatment. So I talked to her a little bit, asked her what does she do, and she has 2 kids, and her husband had passed away from AIDS about 2 years prior, and this was her first time coming in to get tested. So just based on that 2 years of living with this infection, her immune system was already severely compromised, and she probably would have qualified for the government drugs that they would have given her, except for she never came in again for her CD4 count. So basically she tested positive and we didn't see her again. So that's one of the things that Maytree is trying to combat, making sure that people know that treatment options are available. So this is a pretty huge thing because as of today, the United States has no policy on HIV and AIDS. The infection is prevalent pretty high. So this is another thing that I wanted to talk about is the World Health Organization does not consider India a very high priority on their lists because their prevalence of the infection is 0.3%, which is half of what the prevalence is in the United States. So India is actually doing better than the United States in terms of this infection. But one thing that I just want to point out is the population density. So you can see right here that the population density is completely different. You have about 364 people living per square mile in India in comparison to 32 people, per square kilometer, as in comparison to 32 people living per square kilometer here in the United States. So because their population is so high, 0.3% actually accounts for about 2.4 million episodes of the infection in the country. So their prevalence is about half of what the United States is, but in terms of the episodes, it's basically double of what we have in the United States. So their policy is actually doing very well. They have the National AIDS Control Program, which has basically created a multi-sectoral approach for combating the epidemic. So what they've done is India has 28 states within the country, and each state has basically kind of divided up and it's basically like a divide and conquer strategy where each state kind of works on prevention based on the traditions, the religion, the education level of the people living in that area. So just to compare and contrast, the United States, like I said, has no policy for people who are living with HIV and AIDS or people who might be at risk for it. The only policy that they do have is criminalization. So people who might not disclose their HIV status to a partner or to a spouse, they can actually be sent to jail in a lot of states. So with that being said, I just want to encourage everyone to, find some activism in their communities, whether it's HIV or anything else that you want to work on nationally or locally. The United States has had a good track record with population-based programs and working at it on a huge kind of national level. So November 6th is Election Day, so please vote whether or not you really like either of the candidates. And that is all. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabia. Okay. So our next speaker, I have a string of questions for both of you, so I can't wait till we get to the Q&A here, is Bradley Iott. Thanks, Bradley, before I butchered it. Bradley is majoring in anthropology and urban studies, and he conducted ethnographic research in a health clinic located in an urban village of Delhi. And for those of you who know Delhi, you know that these urban villages are this kind of amazing sites. He studied the implications of providing healthcare to the poor in a community clinic and how healthcare providers managed their resource limitations and how they offered care that was indeed culturally sensitive to the community, using a balance, it appears, of Western medical practices and local traditions. We look forward to hearing from you.
Hi, everyone. So like she said, I'm Brad. I'm studying anthropology and urban studies, and I'm also studying graduate school at the School of Public Health, working with with epidemiology, so kind of going with that. But this summer, I kind of looked at health from a cultural lens instead of a data-driven lens. And as I think about my project, and I'm planning to write a thesis, an honors thesis with it, so I'm trying to do some research, and there's a lot of really data-driven pieces that can go with health. But I wanted to look at what does health mean on like a personal level. So I had a little bit of a hypothesis, and basically, our religious beliefs and our cultures guide how we live our lives. So I wanted to know, how do they influence how we practice medicine? How do we treat the sick among us, basically? So specifically, I was working in Nizamuddin Basti, and as is explained to me, Basti can be translated as slum or urban village, so depending on how full your metaphorical glass is. This is a picture I took, kind of give you a context of what Nizamuddin actually looks like. This was a day where the village, where it gets transformed into a Monday market, and there's all these vendors selling things, and the monsoon had come, so there's all these tarps trying to stop the rain, but failing. So I worked with an NGO called the Hope Project, and the Hope Project does a spectrum of things, from running a non-formal girls' school to a health clinic, to focus groups, just a wide variety of things. And the organization, like the community, is a Sufi organization, so and the community is very much Muslim. So it serves as a cornerstone that everyone is very aware of in the community. So to talk a little bit about how medicine works, first, like the clinic environment, this is a kind of just an awareness poster that was there. When you have to take into consideration like who is coming to the clinic and how is it being run, and what kind of problems are people having, and what kind of care is being given. part of my further research since I've come back, I found a report that was looking at the gaps in care around India. And so why do places like the Hope Project exist? Well, simply put, it's because government hospitals and government medicine dispensaries aren't available to everyone. And they've done really fancy math and mapping studies to tell you how, numerically how far away and how many people don't have access. But I can tell you that clearly this community isn't served. And additionally, the Hope Project has a mobile medical unit, a van that goes out and distributes medicine to 5 other slum areas in Delhi. So clearly there are massive gaps where people just don't have the access to care that they need. Also, a little bit more on the patients, actually, first. I found that mostly women were coming in and children, partly because children at the school were given free care, and typically men were working, so it was kind of unexplained. The reason why their prevalence in the clinic is small was difficult to track down, but people were, like doctors and things, thought that it might be social stigma about medicine and just daily jobs, the drivers and things of that sort that were already talked about. And also just the little things. In talking with the director of the Hope Project, I asked what the biggest challenge they faced was, and it was just educating people. And I thought, well, certainly it must be some kind of medical thing or some economic thing. Well, no, really, it's just about spreading the word about medicine. And when I say that, I mean medicine as we know it. So allopathic or Western or technocratic, whatever your lingo is for it. Medicine that proves to be effective and is based by scientific research and backed and things of that sort. I found that a lot of people in this community relied on traditional healing practices, and as it was described to me, more like voodoo kind of medicine, and they just didn't understand that effective care for ailments and both common and severe was available. This clinic offered tuberculosis medicine, but some or HIV treatments and things like that, but people didn't necessarily know. So I wanted to talk a little bit about like what kind of culture that people have and how does that come into play. Being a really religious community, that was like a jumping point for me. In talking with the doctor that was assigned to dispense tuberculosis medicine, he showed me the government's the Indian government has a TB treatment program, and clinics have these kits of dosed medicines. And they work really hard to keep people like coming in and taking the medicine, and they monitor, and it's all free, but it's a situation where if you get off the track, it's a very difficult thing to fix. But he pointed out one of the blister packs, there's like 7 white pills in a red gel cap, and he pointed to the red one and he said, well, a Jane can't take this, it's non-veg. And I was taken aback because from my experience in the United States, I've never thought about, that as an issue. I never thought about, well, my religious practice comes first. I never, that was never something that occurred to me. So it was really interesting to see that in this community, the doctors had to think not only about the ailment, but the person behind the ailment. What this brings us to the staff culture. So what you're seeing here is a board that was in the waiting room, and there's this really interesting flow chart of all the people that were working. And you can see the health director is this Dr. Gill, and it was interesting to kind of compare who's on this list and what's their story, what's their background, why are they here. The motivations to practice medicine were all over the board, or even to help serve in healthcare. Dr. Gill being a world-traveled doctor with training across Europe, but dispensers that grew up in Nizamuddin and went to the Hope Project school and were given training to dispense medicine, which kind of is an interesting thing because health here was so essential that it was that typical things that we think about when we think about going to the hospital. HIPAA, not really a thing. My brother wants to go to pharmacy school, so I was thinking about medicine being dispensed, and you have people that have effectively an elementary education giving out medicine. And I was thinking, well, wait, why do you need, this really advanced degree in the United States? Well, the context is completely different. Also looking at the community, like the clinic as a community space, deep in the heart of Nizamuddin, you kind of saw from the pictures, it's a real, the streets are very narrow, there are a lot of people. Rabia's density graph shows you that there are just a ton of people in India in confined space. So the community, the clinic itself was very much part of the community. There were 2 thoroughfares and doors on either side, so the clinic was kind of a transition area, a flowing area for people to come and go. It didn't have the kind of stigma that a hospital had. You didn't go there to be fixed. It was just a piece of the NGO. And I remember, like kids would just be like getting water from the filtered water dispensary or things like that. No one has ID badges, or there aren't security people or anything like that. It's not like a very structured thing like, UMHS is or something like that. And then also while in the clinic, what was kind of interesting is they let me observe a lot of exams and things that were going on, and because the doctors were only in for a narrow window in the day, there would be a ton of people waiting. And I noticed that the door of the examination room never really closed. There was even a screen, like a privacy screen, and I never saw it leave the corner. People would just kind of peer in as you were being, seen. There would just be people in the doorway looking, and it was like, it was a community thing. It wasn't made to be awkward. It wasn't made to be something about a matter of privacy. I mean, it was professional. It's not to say it was unprofessional, but the context is different. And I thought that was really interesting because you'd never think, or at least for me, I've always thought healthcare was healthcare no matter where you go. And then, of course, the big one is resource limitations. As with anything with an NGO in an impoverished place, resource limitations were a major concern. So I found that the clinic could only do so much, but they relied heavily on really good relationships with larger hospitals and dispensaries and things of that sort to be able to have a referral service for people that needed advanced care. Some numbers were kind of interesting. In talking to the director, we asked what the plan for expansion was, and the idea would be to open a birth clinic. And I was thinking, wow, like that's like a really impressive thing. And so I asked how much it would cost, and they said about $2,000 or $3,000 US. I know people with laptops that cost that much money, and the implications for the community to have a medically, staffed birthing center would be tremendous. And a quick anecdote. The doctors were explaining to me that one of the things that they strive to do is to try to diagnose with as few tests as possible to reduce cost. So when a woman came in and they thought she had anemia, rather than running a blood test, they took a drop of water from a water bottle and put it on one of her nails. And the doctor said, well, if the water stays on the nail, that means that the curvature is such that the drop will stay and not roll off, and that means that she has anemia. So this kind of strange MacGyver medicine was really interesting to see. I think that's all the time I have, but here's some photos to end in the community. Thank you.
Our next speaker today is Marisa Pereira, who is a double major in psychology and Spanish. And Marisa worked with the Banyan Tree, working in the field, broadly speaking, of mental health interventions. And I'll let her tell you more.
Okay, thank you for the intro. So my name's Marisa. Let me just open this really quickly. So like you said, I'm a major in psychology and Spanish. I'm a senior. And so I am double majoring, but psychology is sort of the major that's most relevant to my future career interests. So I want to actually be a practicing clinical psychologist. And so that's sort of what was the motivation for this project. So, okay. So it's called an in-depth analysis of family-based interventions in treating mentally ill in Chennai, India. So I was in Chennai. It's in the south of India, for those of you who don't know. So All right, let me tell you a little bit about me. So who am I? So first of all, I had an amazing opportunity to go to Agra and visit the Taj Mahal with some upcoming speakers. So yeah, so that's what this picture is from. And so like I mentioned, I'm a senior, double majoring, and I've really been pursuing psychology for basically my whole time here at the university. And so I have developed a lot of research interest just in my past 3 years focusing so much on psychology. And so that's sort of what drove this project. So let me tell you a little bit about it. So it's with the mentally ill individual and the family. So the relationship between the two is sort of what I explored in this project. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the reasoning behind why I was interested in that. So in a lot of interventions, like psychological interventions, lots of treatments, they're based on Western conceptions, Western society. And that's because this is where the bulk of, top rated research comes from. However, in terms of dealing with Asian Americans, Latinas, living in the U.S., just other cultural minority groups in the U.S., these interventions aren't always as effective for such groups because they're based on more Western ideology. So that's expected. So I sort of wanted to go to India in order to explore how the mental health facet is there and how treatment is different there than it is here. So that's what I was kind of looking at. So first, a little bit about Chennai. So you can see it. Chennai is actually a huge city in India. It has malls, shopping. That picture over there is a men's university, very, very well known. Some shopping, major city center. So it's clear this is a cultural, societal, there's a lot of stuff going on. But one thing that not a lot of people know is that Chennai actually has the largest population of mentally ill individuals in all of India. And these are people on the outskirts of society. So Chennai has people who are extremely financially well off, but at the same time, so many mentally ill individuals who don't receive the care they deserve. So I was sort of working with these people most of the time I was there. So this is my NGO, the Bunyan. This is their motto, I exist, therefore I am. And they have been an NGO since 1993, so they've been around for a few decades now. And they're actually, throughout all of India, they are the primary initiative for mental health in all of India. So, and that's saying even more than the government. So they've led a lot of the government initiatives and things that have come out from the government. It's come from their research. It's come from things that the Bunyan has done. So one thing about the Bunyan, its name, it's the banyan tree. You're probably all familiar with it. But a major, the metaphor of the banyan tree is its roots, right? It's this huge tree. It's this giving tree. Its roots go forever and ever. It leads to other, plants. So a main reason I wanted to work with the Bunyan and volunteer with them is because they actually look at the individual with a humanistic philosophy, which is not always the case here in the U.S. They actually look at the individual as a whole, not just for their mental illness. And so, therefore I exist, therefore I am is sort of an explanation of that. All right. So they have 4 centers. They're a huge NGO. Like I said, they've been around since 1993. And so this is the first one. I still can't pronounce it. Colloquium. Hopefully that's right. But this is their main center. So in this building actually is where all the primary, offices are. But additionally, they actually house 250 mentally ill women who they sort of pick up off the streets. And so they bring them here. They give them vocational training and just sort of give them the skills and training and just give them the environment they may need in order to be integrated back into society. So this is the main job of the Bunyan. So they go find these women from the streets, homeless women who are separated from their families, completely alone, not even really able to function on their own, extreme, severe disability. So they bring them here. They have full-time nursing staff. They all look after them at all times of the day. And so, like I mentioned, so they have some amazing things for these women. So they let them stay there for about 6 months to a year. Obviously, each case is different, but that's the average amount of time they're there. And they offer lots of services for these women. So they help them with personal grooming. They help them with just creating things. So there's this one initiative of the Bunyan, especially this center, where they have the women sort of making arts and crafts. So like scarves, hats, things like that. And these women really pour a lot of their time into it, and it gives them sort of like accountability for doing something and responsibility, something they haven't been given because they've been thrown to the edges of society due to their mental illness. And so when the Bunyan has events, which they do often, they actually have these women selling the things that they have made. So it really gives them a nice sense of responsibility, which allows them to sort of gain skills to come back into society. So this, and also another really interesting point about Adzemovic. So this is the main center. This is the one that's been around since 1993. Its other 3 centers have been around a little bit of less time. But this center has housed over 1,500 homeless women, different homeless women, since its initiation in 1993. And what they do is, so after the women are deemed stable, they actually spend their whole time while they are taking care of the women in finding their families in order to send them back with their family. So that's sort of why I chose this NGO, right? I'm interested in the family. And so 1,200 of the 1,500 who this center has seen have all gone back to their families successfully. The other 300 sort of account for potential familial problems and things like that come up later. But to this day, and the research that they've continue to do on these women, 1,200 have remained with their families. So that's huge. There's nothing in the U.S. that does anything like that. This is obvious because the U.S. is an individualistic society, whereas India is collectivistic. So you can see that in terms of this treatment. They really work in India to bring you back to your family, bring you back to that unit, whereas here, it's you focusing on getting well, and they don't really treatment here doesn't really account for your interactions with other people. It's more like your mental processes, and it sort of ends there. So that's what this center focused on. Another center it's the Community Mental Health Project. So this one is not a 24-hour live-in center. It's more of a daycare center. So they have outpatient clinics here multiple times a week, and they're basically 10-hour, 12-hour clinics. They go all day long, and they're completely free clinics. So what the Bunyan does, so here in this picture, in these boxes are actually medicines, like very strong medicines for all types of mental disorders, so depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, suicide, all of the above. And this woman is just the nurse who comes every week and dispenses them. So how this works is this is the doctor's office. So it's a psychiatrist. There's a psychiatrist and a general doctor. So the psychiatrist is the one who comes and sits at this table, listens to everyone's problems, and he's the one who diagnoses them. That's it. There's hundreds and hundreds of people who come to these clinics. There's 2 doctors, and these doctors volunteer their time. So the Bunyan is a free organization. They give out all these medications for free because their main population is the homeless, right? They don't have the money to pay for this. They don't even have homes. So this is all free. So these people are waiting in lines all day long. They come before even I or the doctor got there, and they'd be there till the very end of the day just waiting. And so these clinics were on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. So the primary thing that I did while I was there, the bulk of what I did, was assisting the psychiatrist and the general doctor. So for me, a major thing was the language barrier. They speak Telugu, which I do not know, but luckily the doctor translated back to me, and there were a few English cases. So I got to hear a lot of different things, and I'll tell you some brief examples of those a little bit in a few minutes. So that's what this center did. So this is the daycare center. So on the right is a note that's written from the patients to the 2 doctors that I just mentioned, so the psychiatrist and the general doctor. And it was cute. It was written on World Doctor Day. And then on the left here is just the sign that's outside of it. So what this center is, this is another center, and they are a 9-to-5 type of clinic. And what they do is they allow patients to come in. So patients have to get screened to see if they're even able to join. It's actually pretty selective, and there's so many people on the list who want to do it, but in order to devote their resources properly, they can only fit a certain amount of people right now. So what they do is individuals from all ages, and these are mostly adults, so from all ages, they come in and they actually do vocational training for them with the end goal of getting these individuals a job, an actual real-time job. So they have connections. The Bunyan has connections with many organizations in the area, and they know that they're bringing mentally ill persons who previously had a mental illness to them. So that's what this daycare center focuses on. So it's a 9 to 5 type of thing, and people can stay there up till 6 months. So while I was there, I got to talk to this one man who he was a patient there. He'd been with the center actually for longer than the average of 6 months. So he'd been there for a year. The staff knew him really well, and he told me that he had epilepsies and seizures since he was born, since he was a baby. And to this day, he struggles with them. And so for him, a major problem with getting work was that his hands were always shaking. And for that reason, he was never really able to maintain a job. So just things like this that the Bunyan works on. So another really interesting thing that came out of this daycare center, and another way how the Bunyan sort of integrates all of their things, is that they had the patients who would be at this 9 to 5 center, they would have them actually create the dispensary bags. So you saw those boxes in the previous picture with all the medications. They actually had these patients during these daycare days create bags out of newspapers in which the medications were dispensed in. So sort of just more things giving them autonomy, responsibility, things like that. All right. Oh, and then one other thing I wanted to mention is that the 4th center, it's called Kovalam, and I actually didn't get a chance to go there. However, what that center was, it's actually a brand new center. It's only been around for a few years, and it's a full-time housing for individuals whose families don't take them back, who don't want them back. So that center had only about 7 people at the time when I was working in India. So that's just another thing. The Bunyan really does try to account for all aspects of the spectrum. All right, so while I was there, I was really fortunate, and so I don't know if this picture is clear enough, but pretty much what it is it's a conference that I was able to attend that the Bunyan put on, and it was a conference with 50 of the top psychologists and psychiatrists in India. They all flew to Chennai for the weekend, and they discussed what to do with long-term housing and just the growing mentally ill population in India. So there were some government leaders and things like that. But the reason I put this slide in here is because while I was at this conference, I got the chance to meet this director of a mentally ill institute so he is the director of the Institute for Human Behavior and Social Sciences in Delhi, which is actually pretty much the only successful government mental health organization in India. And so I was talking to him and he was telling me about his facilities, and he was like, you should come out. So I actually got the chance to go to Delhi and visit his facilities. And the main relationship or the main aspect of his facilities that I was interested in looking at in terms of how it related to my project and the family is that he actually has a facility for pregnant mothers with mental illness. So this was interesting, and this was a huge cultural difference that I saw because at this conference, a major point that was discussed, this was like a 2-day roundtable discussion, so like a 9 to 7 type of thing for 2 days in a row. And about half that time, a major discussion was what to do with pregnant mothers who are mentally ill. So that means in terms of, do you keep the mother with the child, or do you separate the child for risk of the mother? So now Western philosophy would say immediately you separate the child. That's like poses a huge risk to the child. That's not okay. But to my surprise, every single person in that room, and these are the top psychologists and psychiatrists, every single one except for 2 doctors said the mother should stay with the child. So that was a shock to me. So he actually was like the biggest proponent of that. And so accordingly, his facility in Delhi actually had a ward for these mentally ill mothers and their children. So there was a nurse assigned to each child and to each mother. So when I went there, I got to see it, and it was just amazing, to see a different kind of result in terms of the same problem here and there, just how it's portrayed so differently and how much focus they put on remaining with the family. So, all right, so some points. So this kind of goes back to what I just said about contrasting cultures. But so after all my experiences with all these different patients and clients and things, these are sort of reflecting on it. These are the points that I sort of saw that were different. So the first is caregiver versus institutionalized care. So another main thing that I worked on while I was there was actually creating this sort of psychoeducation curriculum. So what that means is sort of a packet, and I helped develop the content for this, a packet for the families or the caregivers of mentally ill individuals because of the amount of stress and strain that it puts on their lives. So that happens here too, right? But it's at such a different level there, sort of due to this first point, because here we have things like, there's senior homes, there's mentally ill facilities for people to go to where they can be taken care of. But that's not necessarily the case in India. And most of the responsibility for taking care of a mentally ill individual falls on loved ones. So that's what this first point comes into. So, and then again, the second point. The third point is shame. So this is a huge, huge thing that I saw with many cases in India. So let me briefly tell you about this one patient I saw. So she was a recent widow, and her husband was an alcoholic, but she didn't find out till they were married. So too late. So it was an arranged marriage, and sort of the mentality of the husband's parents when they got him arranged marriage to her was that, his alcoholism will go away with his marriage to this woman. So that's sort of, and I came to find out that that's actually a common mentality among, the mentally ill population in India. And that was just shocking to me. So in turn, so he actually did pass away due to his alcoholism. But before that, he and this woman, this patient who I saw, they actually had a child together. So her daughter's about 10 years old now. But this woman is still living with her in-laws, and she just presented a lot of problems due to the strain of it. But the reason I bring this example up with shame is because she was brought into the clinic by her father. It took him 3 months to get her to even agree to come in. And luckily, I was there during this time. And I sat with her for 2.5 hours to try to get her to even speak 10 words to us. She just was so scared to say anything. She just felt so humiliated to even bring this up. And so there's a couple other cases, but that's one example of how shame plays such a large role in people getting appropriate treatment there. And then a last point that I just sort of noticed was a lack of concern for privacy. So I believe Brad mentioned this with what he saw in Adzemovic, that they had like privacy protectors, the doors would be open. In India with the Bunyan, privacy was never once a concern. I had people coming up to me, and this was probably due to the fact that I was dealing with a lower socioeconomic population, but I had people coming up to me telling me their stories. They never had a concern for privacy. Doctors would say, just come sit in. So that's interesting because that's clearly very different than here. So these are some pictures. So on the left is a woman who I saw every single day at Colloquium, the first center that I showed you. And she was one of the women who was living in this center. She'd been picked up from off the streets, and she was actually returning to her family. The Bunyan had contacted her family, and she was returning to them a few weeks after I left. And she was definitely doing a lot better. Every day she would come and have a conversation with me. It was great. And then on the right are the two doctors from the Daycare Center and the second place I told you about. All right, so this is the last slide. So this is just sort of a quote I saw on this little boy's shirt at one of the clinics one day. I realized it could be a little bit negative, but I thought it was great, and I thought it sort of represented the Bunyan's philosophy in the sense that they look at the individual as a whole there. They really look at it as, I'm different, I'm unique, I'm my own person. Just because I have a mental illness, that's not all that defines me. So yeah, so that was my time in India.
Great. Our next speaker is Tessa Adzemovic, and who it appears also was at the Hope Project in Nizamuddin, the same in Nizamuddin Basti. So, Tessa.
Hi, my name is Tessa. The name of my project is Nizamuddin Basti and the Hazrat Inayat Khan Foundation. The question I was asking was if NGOs are cures or Band-Aids. So as you already heard, I was at the same location as Brad, as Hope. And actually, the University of Michigan had a student group go there about 3 years ago on their GIEU program. And so they really consider the University of Michigan their brothers, and that's what they'll tell you right away if you're ever lucky enough to visit. So a little bit about me. My name is Tessa. I am a senior this year. I'm studying biochemistry and French. Next year, I will be taking a year off, and I will be applying to MD, MPH programs. Part of the reason why I want to do MD, MPH is the HOPE project, so hopefully that will be more clear as we go through. Before I left this summer, I knew that I had certain research interests that I wanted to delve into in Delhi. The first one being this concept of an urban village. I wasn't very aware of it before studying India. So an urban village is a euphemism, actually, for a slum. It used to be a municipal design term. And it is this concept of a community within a larger metropolis, but it's also usually a marginalized community. There are many, many urban villages within Delhi because it is a city with a population of 16 million people. Some of the more popular ones have a larger population and are also more frequented by tourists are Chandni Chowk in the north, and then the more posh Hazkas in the south. I was also curious about NGOs and how they are developed. Why do we need non-governmental organizations? Why is it that the Indian government can't support the needs of its people? And within the concept of an NGO, what does it mean to be an NGO in health, education, or finance? So again, I was working with the Hazrat Inayat Khan Foundation. It was started by Vilayat Inayat Khan and named after his father, who truly inspired him. Their quote is, "Towards the one, the perfection of love, harmony, and beauty, the only being united with all the illuminated souls who form the embodiment of the Master, the Spirit of Guidance." This embodies their Sufi philosophy and Sufi idealism. They are driven by the spirit of service to humanity. They have been around for about 14 years now, and they were started as a modest milk program, and they've come a long way. This is a picture from the Basti, and I'm using a quote from the book In Spite of the Gods by Edward Luce. And the quote says, "Like many other visitors, I'm always struck by the sense of community, color, and laughter that one sees in India's slums." These three things, the sense of community, the color, and the laughter, were very apparent in the Basti, from the colors of food in the market to the laughs of the children playing cricket or the goats on the roofs. You just wouldn't believe some of the things we saw. So this is the Basti Nizamuddin. I want to point this out. So here, this very concentrated area is the slum, and then to the right you have Humayun's tomb, which is a World Heritage Site, and then to the north you actually have a brand new golf course where very wealthy people go to golf, and it's just it's very common to see the very rich and the very poor side by side in India. So again, the HOPE project has 3 divisions. It has a health clinic, a school, and a livelihood program that focuses primarily on women's microfinance programs. I just wanted to quickly get a raise of hands. Who in the last month has gone out to eat somewhere outside of their house? Who in the last month has gone to the movie theater? I have. Who has been on a plane in their lifetime? So I ask because while I was working in the school, in the education division, I wanted to start to know the children. and I asked all the wrong questions. One of the first things that I started out by saying was, "Oh, where would you guys like to travel to?" And I'm speaking to students whose fathers are primarily rickshaw drivers. If they work, the mothers stay in the home. So I quickly backtracked and I said, "Okay, have you seen any movies lately?" Also, wrong question. And then I quickly went to food, and I was just able to tell them I like mangoes. But this is just a story to really show what kind of a community I was working in and had the opportunity to work in. That being said, they were the most generous people I've ever met. So I focused, despite my time in the school and the preschool, I spent most of my time in the health center because that's where my passions lie. My research goals while I was there were to address the efforts of individuals working for the HOPE project, so the volunteers, the doctors, the nurses, to build hypotheses on resource limitations, which Brad touched upon, to explain how the health center provides a health infrastructure within the community, which is very tightly knit. After, I think, a month there, I would walk around and everyone would be waving and saying hi. It was so nice. And then the long-lasting and sustainable effects of not only the NGO, but the health clinic. So to your left, you have the view from outside my window, and on the right, you have the entrance to the health center. On the first day, when I met with the doctor, my research was primarily ethnographic and survey data, as well as many interviews. I was told the clinic's objectives. So they're trying to maintain and improve this highly effective OPD, and they're also expanding their mobile medical unit, which I will talk about a little more later. They're providing lab facilities, and they're trying to maintain these awareness programs that they have started. These are the 7 divisions at the health center. And Brad talked a little bit about the tuberculosis doctor. I spent a lot of time in the child care clinic, as well as the mobile medical unit. The staff were Dr. Gill, Dr. Sandhya, Dr. Arif, and Dr. Jyoti. Most of them have had dual appointments. So Dr. Arif was the tuberculosis doctor as well as the staff on the medical mobile unit. Dr. Sandhya was a pediatrician, but often she would have grown-up adults come in during her clinic times, and it was not a problem. They were very accommodating. My responsibilities varied over the time there. And again, most of my research was conducted with the doctors themselves, both homeopathic and allopathic. So over my time there, I developed my ideas of what their resource limitations were. The first one was space. So as you saw, the population in which I was working was very dense. So as Brad said, they want to open a birthing clinic, but they actually don't have room right now to expand. The next thing was financial. Despite the fact that this birthing clinic only costs $2,000, they can't get their hands on those $2,000. And then there were educational aspects in that, again, this has resonated with what everyone has said today, but women aren't receiving much education. And also drug abuse was a huge problem. The 3 most prevalent drugs are heroin, cocaine, and marijuana. I met several drug addicts at the Hope Clinic and on the mobile medical unit runs, and they're starting outreach programs for these drug addicts. This is the child care clinic. On the left, you have a picture of Amreen, one of the girls that is also in their creche, their preschool. And on the right is Dr. Sandhya treating a patient. And again, these rooms are so small compared to what we have here. This is the eye clinic, another child from the project. And this is the mobile medical unit. The new director has just replaced the van. So it used to be huge and it couldn't access the slums. It goes to 5 slums. They're all predominantly Muslim communities, and they are, a couple of them are outside of Delhi and the other 3 are within. So in this van fits a doctor, another dual appointment, a pharmacist and driver, and a nurse that goes in there. So just a brief discussion of what has been done in the last 30 years. Contraceptives are being used at rates higher than ever before. There was a large stigma around it, but the Hope Project is working on breaking down that stigma. 720 women are currently in self-help groups, and 7,000 people have been affected by the organization. Also, within the community, they took a survey to see how many people had used the resources, and it was 3/4 of the population. So what it comes down to making an efficient and effective NGO and a clinic is really having these dual appointments, so making the most of your resources. Another thing is open-mindedness. A lot of the doctors were of very different religious backgrounds, and they were working together in complete harmony. And this people, family, community, I just want to tell you a quick story about a woman that I interviewed on one of our final days at the clinic. Her name was Farhana, and she had come into the clinic. She didn't speak a word of English, and I don't speak a word of Hindi, so we had someone translate. But basically, she was there on a day when the power was out, a regular occurrence in the clinic, which is another thing about being successful. If you want to be successful in India, you work through everything. But so Farhana had actually, her husband and her 2 daughters had died of tuberculosis about 10 years ago, and her sons were left in charge of the household. They sold the house that she had been raised in, and she wasn't given any of the money. So she was basically thrown out on the streets. And what she said is that when her own true family threw her out, the Hope Project took her in. So that was truly beautiful. And I think it's this sense of community, this sense of generosity that really makes a functioning and effective non-governmental organization. So thank you, shukriya, to all of you for being here, for Zilka, and to, of course, the donor that gave us this experience.
Thanks, Tessa. So our second to last speaker today is Eric Raynal, who is majoring in chemical engineering, and he researched EMR systems in hospitals in several cities in India. He'll tell us a bit more about that. Thank you.
Great. Did the same thing. Okay. Good evening. My name is Eric Raynal, like I was introduced. I spent my time in India studying electronic medical records. I've titled my research project, Utilizing Electronic Medical Record Systems in Indian Healthcare Systems and Emerging Technology, and you'll soon see why. To give a little bit of introduction about me, I am from Petoskey, Michigan, up north. I grew up there my entire life. I am majoring in chemical engineering, but I am also a pre-medical student. So I'm currently applying and hopefully will be in medical school somewhere this time next year. So to incorporate my interest in medicine with my interest in engineering, I tried to design a project that would relate those two things. Additionally, when I was in my sophomore year of college, my mother, who works in a blood lab, her office went through a transition from paper records to electronic medical records. So she would fill me in on all the ins and outs on what she had to do to deal with all these changes. So to come up with a project that was relevant to all these things, I selected to study electronic medical records. Okay, so they are fairly new in the U.S. UHS actually just implemented a EMR system this summer. Like I said, my mom's office in Northern Michigan, they switched over to electronic records 2 years ago. So even in the U.S., they're fairly new. I was interested to see what level of awareness doctors and hospitals had for EMR systems in India. Part of the reason that it takes so long to implement, and everyone isn't jumping ship to the electronic records right away, is that they're fairly complex systems to implement in hospitals. There are a lot of stakeholders involved. You have to consider the needs of the nurses, the needs of the patient, needs of the doctors. There's a lot that goes into it. In addition, if you've been practicing medicine for 20 years, you have it down to a science. You really don't want to switch to something new that you don't like. We're all there. We don't like change. It's okay. And then the final big challenge that I identified before leaving that I wanted to investigate was how do you handle backloading records? So the biggest challenge for my mom's office was that all of the patients that they had records stored for, they needed to scan those and put them into an electronic medical record. So I was interested with how many people that I heard exist and live in India. How would a hospital or a clinic deal with all of those records? So those were some of the questions that I had going in. So I've been mentioning EMR systems. What is an actual EMR system? This is a screenshot from a patient file. I'll use the mouse just to point out a couple of things. You'll notice up here that there's some patient demographics, name, social security number, birth date. Here you have some allergies, some postings that a doctor should be aware of. Here's a list of active problems that you could see on a patient's file, any medications that they're on, recent lab results, vitals from the last time they arrived, and then any future appointments. So this would be like a sample from a record that a doctor would have access to when a patient came in for a visit. Some of these things I learned are pretty interesting. Like in India, there's no such thing as a social security number. So if you're trying to use a system like this, what do you do with that? So that was kind of interesting. Okay, you're not expected to read all this or see it, but these are some of the features these are all of the features, in fact, of this particular EMR system. It's developed by the VHA, the Veterans Health Administration of the U.S., which leads me into my next slide. I worked in India with a company called Ohum Healthcare. They provide EMR solutions based on the VHA's Vista software. So they've taken the software Vista that the VHA provides for free and adapted it for use in India, in Indian hospitals. Their mission is to enable quality healthcare for all through appropriate adoption of world-class clinical information systems in an affordable and sustainable manner. And they're headquartered in Pune, Maharashtra. So that's where I began my time. And the specific questions that I was investigating were, what is the level of awareness and understanding of EMR systems in Indian hospitals? And what are the challenges associated with EMR implementation? To investigate these questions, I worked with Ohum Healthcare to receive training on Vista. I learned all the ins and outs of the software. I could theoretically see any one of you and register all of your information and record your whatever's wrong with you. That was really beneficial for me going into the hospitals that I went to, because I had an understanding of what the doctors were working with. If I hadn't received that training, I wouldn't have an understanding of what all goes into an EMR system. So while I was receiving this training in Pune with Ohum, I was arranging meetings with doctors, interviews with doctors in 4 urban cities, Pune, Mumbai, Bangalore, and Delhi. And then the next 6 weeks, I traveled to those 4 cities, which itself was a great adventure because they're really far apart. And all really culturally different. So I really enjoyed that. Okay, so the things that I discovered through my interviews. I learned one of the first questions that I asked is, to you, what defines an EMR system? And the answer to this question was extremely varied. Some people would say, oh, it's just like when you can register a patient and put in their demographics, how old they are, where they live. Some people said, oh, no, it needs to have the ability to bill through the system, run patient billing. Still others said, okay, it needs to have a PACS system or something to view MRI results or x-rays digitally. And then related to that is an RIS system. So I'd say moving from the top to the bottom of this list of things, an EMR system is slowly increasing its level of complexity, but a true EMR system needs to include all of these and more. So that was interesting to hear everyone's varied definition. Additionally, another one of the questions that I asked was how long do you think, based on where you are now with EMR implementation, would it take to reach a fully sustainable EMR solution in your hospital? And the answers ranged, I think, unrealistically from 6 months, and I think also unrealistically to 5 years, where 6 months is too short and 5 years might be too long. I think realistically they could achieve an EMR solution in their hospital in like 1 to 2 years. But that just goes to show how unsure people are of it, or at least Indian doctors are unsure of it. I also asked about what they thought were the biggest obstacles to reaching this milestone. The answers here, again, ranged really widely, but the most common ones that I heard were limited resources, which included data collection sites and capital expenses. So data collection sites being most practically a computer. Whenever a doctor sees a patient in an Indian hospital, they need to, if they're going to use an EMR system, they need to have a way to put that information into a computer or into a digital record, which means you need to have computers at every patient visit site. Sometimes when I was walking with doctors and they were showing me around the hospital, that meant the hallway and the stairwell. Those aren't viable places to have a computer. So that is an obstacle that needs to be overcome. One solution to that are tablets. But again, this is related to capital expenses. To put computers or tablets everywhere is kind of expensive, and that's an additional challenge. Okay, let's see, what else? Number of patients. Patient volumes are very, very high in Indian hospitals. Doctors that I spoke to, they said, why should I have any interest in EMR systems when my main priority is taking care of patients and seeing as many as I can in a day? Because at the end of the day, when I go home, there will still be patients that I need to see. So it was interesting to see how some doctors would be really enthusiastic about using technology in healthcare, especially the younger doctors. They readily identified patient volumes as a large obstacle to implementing an EMR system. Additionally, some of the older doctors that I talked to brought up user resistance. They weren't really interested in using computers to begin with. Some of the hospitals that I had visited had started to implement computers in patient care, and some of them weren't interested at all. And because the hospitals don't require the doctors to use the computers, they just don't, frankly. So some of the discussion points that I'll talk about, as a result of my investigation, I also was looking for any sort of equivalent to the HITECH Act in the U.S. This was a piece of legislature passed in 2009 that makes EMR systems a priority for healthcare. The federal government actually subsidizes U.S. hospitals and clinics to implement an EMR system sooner rather than later. So the subsidies are decreased each year. So I was looking for something like that in Indian healthcare, or at least what was the Indian federal government's role in EMR systems and healthcare as a whole. And for the most part, they had no role. I was talking with one doctor who said, they would really like to see the government take a step into healthcare and play a bigger role, but they're not surprised that they haven't. because they said that when they want the government to step in, they don't, and when they don't want them to step in, they do. So kind of interesting. Let's see. Okay, and then to address one of the questions that I had coming into it about the backloading of records, I asked my interviewees what they thought they would do if they were in charge and implemented an EMR system. What would you do with all the records that you have? And I wasn't exactly prepared for their answer. They said they only have records from their patients who have been there in the last year. And I was kind of taken aback by that and said, well, why, or what goes into that? And turns out in India, when you go see a doctor and you have your appointment, at the end of your appointment, the doctor will hand you your medical record and you will physically take your record home with you. If you choose to come back to that doctor, you take it to them. If you go to a different doctor, a different hospital, you take it there instead. That contrasts to the U.S., where the doctor's office will take your record and hold on to it, and generally you don't ever interact with your record. So that was an interesting contrast that I discovered. And they said, so what their solution, they said, was, well, we'll just ignore all the ones that we have and just begin uploading new records, creating new records as patients come in. Okay, so in conclusion, I would say that EMR technology is on the very forefront of the healthcare sector in India. I believe that I saw that in the larger hospitals that I went to that had more money, that were government funded, they were a little bit farther ahead in implementing in EMR system, or taking steps towards implementation. And then I believe that as the larger hospitals continue to develop their EMR systems, that smaller hospitals and smaller clinics will be able to use those larger hospitals, larger facilities as a role model. I think realistically, in another 5 to 10 years, EMR systems will be the new big thing in Indian healthcare. I think that it will take some time, but I know that through groups like OHUM and other companies whose objectives are the same, it will happen. Additionally, while I was with OHUM, they actually had 2 other interns who were getting their master's in health administration from a college in Pune. And their internship project was to increase awareness, was to go out to hospitals and ask if they were interested in working with OHUM to implement an EMR solution. So through undergraduate and graduate students in India, I believe that EMR systems will become more popular. That concludes my presentation. Thank you for listening. And I almost forgot, but most importantly, thank you, Zilka, and the Center for South Asian Studies, and our anonymous donor for making this possible. So thank you.
Thanks, Eric. Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, healthcare is an amazing growth sector in India, and to think about the number of hospitals that they need, particularly in Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities, to think about these things potentially going up with EMR implementation could just change the kind of face of healthcare in India. So interesting work. Our final speaker today is going to be Carolyn Yarina, who is also majoring in chemical engineering, who worked with Embrace on what sounds like a fabulous project to design low-cost infant warmers that operate without electricity that would contribute to lowering rates of infant mortality on low birth weight babies. So an amazing project. Raynal, I look forward to hearing about it.
Thank you. So my name, as you mentioned, is Carolyn Yarina, and I'm a fourth-year chemical engineering student at the University of Michigan. And I'll be talking to you about my experience on how different organizations are impacting India's rural poor through design and marketing at the base of the pyramid. So first off, I'll give you a little bit of background on me and my motivation for doing this. And so the reason why I started this project in particular is that I'm working on my own NGO in designing appropriate medical diagnostic technologies for rural India, and I'll be moving there in about a year from now. To give you an idea of what the base of the pyramid is, this is the 2.5 billion people across the world that live on less than $2.5 per day. And with the technology and the resource that we have today, I was asking, why aren't we reaching all these people? And what are organizations doing to make an impact on these people? Because unfortunately, this number is only growing. So India itself actually has 700 million people who live on less than $2.5 per day. And India, as Ravi mentioned earlier, about 65% of India's population is rural. So you can imagine the difficulties of actually reaching these people. Lack of infrastructure, lack of the ability to get to them, the low amount of money that they have makes it really difficult to make an impact. So the way that I researched on how to do this was by working at an organization called Embrace Innovations, where I was able to be a part of their development team in creating a low-cost infant incubator. So they were creating a difference by designing a technology and distributing it and giving these hospitals and clinics the capability to save lives. So I went and spent about 3.5 months in India. Very crowded, very crazy, very different from what I've seen in the United States before. And worked for, this is logo of Embrace, the organization I worked for. So you heard a little bit about this, but what Embrace does is it works to save the lives of low birth weight babies by providing a low-cost incubator. And they're different because they didn't design a cheaper way to make an incubator, they reinvented it. So their current product they have on the market it looks like this in the picture. It looks like a little baby sleeping bag. You stick a little packet in the back of the sleeping bag that keeps the baby warm for up to 6 hours. And you heat this packet on an electric heater. So this is very innovative because the mother can hold the child, you can transport it. You don't need to have electricity 24 hours a day because truthfully, most of these places, these rural clinics, have electricity maybe 4 hours every day. And I wanted to work with them because they're at the forefront of medical diagnostic technology. And they have some really interesting infrastructure in that they started out as a nonprofit and now they're a for-profit organization. They have both right now. And I was able to help understand design and marketing firsthand. So I was working on, I was a product designer. I was designing this new incubator that was heated only with boiling water. It was the same type of idea, the same technology. You just took out the heater and replaced that with a boiling water solution. And in doing that, I was able to really learn a lot about what it takes to design for rural India, because the truth is that good design isn't enough. The engineering constraints, we can overcome those with time, but more important is the constraints on money. So these people don't have a lot of money, and the product I was creating, this, because it's heated with boiling water, they're trying to sell it to rural village mothers so that they could take their infant home early and that they could keep it with them and wouldn't have to incur the high cost of keeping it at the hospital or keeping it in an electric incubator. But more important than that, you need multiple other components to make a business work. You need to have the right marketing. You need people to know what you're doing. You need to be able to get there. You need to have a good distribution system. And you also need to know a lot about people. So you need to have the right team, but you also need to understand the culture. So you've heard a lot about how different culture is in India. Collective familial societies, they have a lot of their beliefs that are so integrated into their culture. So how do you change that and bring something new into their systems when they've been doing the same thing for their whole lives? And I kind of went quickly through Embrace because after being at Embrace for the summer, I wanted to know more. What were other organizations doing in order to impact the lives of India's rural poor? Because this is just one example, but there's so many other ways that people impact the rural poor. There's people who sell directly to the rural poor, people who empower them directly through microfinance or incubators, which I'll go more into. There's people like Embrace who sell to organizations that the rural poor use in order to give them further resources so that they can do more. And then the last of these is free services. So just giving them what they need, but not necessarily asking for anything in return. So in order to do that, I was able to talk to a lot of different organizations. I was in Bangalore, India, which is a really big hub for a lot of social entrepreneurship. So empowering the Indian rural villages is the first of these things that I looked at. So the way that this is possible is through a business incubator. And this is something which is a support system for new businesses where these businesses come into this incubator and they get the resources that they need in order to grow, sustain themselves, get the right contacts, because this is when most businesses fail, is right at the beginning. So if you can give, especially rural villagers, so Vilgrow actually targets some rural villagers to come in and start their own businesses, empower themselves in their communities to do more and to grow. Another means of empowerment directly is microloans. So I talked to, some of you may be familiar with the Grameen Bank, which is the most well-known microfinance organization, and that had a branch in India as well. And so what this is most people in rural India don't have access to banking infrastructure. They don't have credit scores. They don't have steady income. So getting them money so that, for example, a tailor can buy a sewing machine and expand his business, or a farmer can buy a new piece of equipment to get more on his farm, they need to have some capital up front. So that's what a microloan does, is what it sounds like. It provides a loan so that they can start to grow themselves in their business that they're working on. The next thing that I identified is selling something directly. And the space that I targeted with direct sales and actually for-profit organizations was energy. So in rural villages, people spend a lot of money on kerosene. So it's very expensive comparably to other types of electricity. They're not on the grids. That's not even an option, and they can't afford to pay regular payments anyways because most of their jobs are irregular. So these were 3 organizations that had different innovations in different areas of those things that I mentioned before: marketing, distribution, design, and pricing. So the first of these had innovations technology. They started with the easier things, and they started with first having targeting people who had more money, and then each year they dedicate themselves to developing the technology so they can target a lower bracket of income. The second of these, Delight, innovates through their distribution. They sell these solar lanterns that you can also plug a cell phone into. And they innovate through distribution, partnering with organizations that already get out to these rural villages, like the kerosene providers or the match sellers, so that they can sell them as well. And finally, Simpa. Most of you have heard the success story about cell phones are everywhere. And this company believes the reason for that is the pay-as-you-go model. You can pay when you can use it, but if you can't afford it at that time, you don't have to pay for it. And so Simpa, what they did is they created the same pay-as-you-go model, and all of that credit would bank up until you could eventually own your solar-powered system. The third out of the 4 methods to reaching India's rural poor is providing a free service. So you've heard from a couple nonprofit organizations in India, and a couple more I'd like to highlight is there's 2 methods I see: a traditional nonprofit or buy one, get one, which is kind of a Tom's shoe model. So I mentioned Delight again because they did have an organization there where they have something where you can buy a solar lantern in the United States, and a portion of that profit goes to donate something in India as well. However, the problem with this is that most of the things that Indian population, rural poor, rural developing countries need is not necessarily the same thing that people in the developed world want. Other things are, you have smaller nonprofits. This is the logo on here for an orphanage, but they're generally smaller, located in one area, don't have a lot of widespread impact, but just impact one community directly. And then one of the few huge nonprofits that I found, or the few that I found, generally have another means of sustaining themselves. This is an organization I work closely with, the Small Vivekananda Youth Movement. And the way that they impacted rural poor is they believed in the dignity of the rural poor. And so they believed that the drive for what they wanted should be from the rural people themselves. And it was really empowering to see how much they treated them and how well they treated them and how much they believed in what the rural people, they knew what they needed, basically. But they supported themselves through college degree programs, through education, through donations. They had a very widespread ways of getting money. And the last one I'll go into, which I already touched on, is solely donating to an intermediate area that the rural poor use. And what I focused on here is healthcare. So that's because these healthcare organizations, such as Embrace, such as For Us, they create diagnostic or medical innovations that empower these people to be able to get the treatment that they need, even without the resources that we might see here in the West, such as constant electricity or local access. And Embrace, as I mentioned, was the incubator for us does eye diagnostic technology. And I'm swinging through these, but if anyone wants to talk to me afterwards and hear more detailed stories, we don't have a lot of time. So, and finally, I just want to go back to where I started with Embrace. So these 4 methods is that the conclusion, the biggest learnings that I had is that design is not everything. All of these companies that I mentioned had innovations in design, but what you need more is letting people know it's out there, know what they need, being able to get to them, and then being at the right price that they can afford. And I want to just leave you with the thought that what these organizations are doing, how they're doing it, and how we can take that into our own lives and how to impact different people with design and technology and reach more people. And finally, I want to say thank you especially to Zilka, our donor, the Center for South Asian Studies, that made really all this possible.
Thanks, Carolyn. I have to say, these symposia that we have, the colloquia on the Summer in South Asia Fellowship are always a pleasure. It's a pleasure to sit here and hear about your projects and the work you've done and the impact that you can have, that you will have, I have no doubt. But we want to take a couple of minutes. We're running a little bit over time, but I still would love to take a couple of minutes. If anybody has questions for any of our speakers today, I'm just going to remind you that Nicholas did theater in southern Bengal. Rabia was working with the Maitri Foundation on public health issues and HIV specifically. Bradley was working at the Hope Foundation. Marisa was working on the mentally ill in Chennai. Tessa was also working at the Hope Foundation doing MPH stuff. Eric was working on hospital EMR systems, and Carolyn was at Embrace. So does anybody have questions? I mean, I don't know, these guys are all facing this way, and they need to actually be facing you. Does anybody? Yeah, you can also stand in front. I don't know if anyone has any questions for them about their experience.
I want to ask Nicholas about a little incident you wrote in your letter to the donor. You mentioned that family that you spent time with for a week. And
a lot of
yeah, the one specifically, you went to this very, very poor family living quite far away, and they had barely any food, but they asked you to stay with them and didn't take any money.
Yeah.
So could you just talk a little bit about that, because it's very moving.
So I had the opportunity to stay with a family that really didn't have much food, and they were, the Theater of the Oppressed. They often, Sanjoy, the founder of the company, often says that that this is that they're working with the oppressed of the oppressed, and I can't tell you how little they had, but I had a really interesting experience where I was sitting And I went to go down to speak with this family. They said, you should speak with this man. They're probably the best representation of oppression in the area. So I took the bus to the boat, to the next bus, to the rickshaw, to like the hike to get there, and I finally arrived at their home. And the one thing that I was really blown away with in these communities was the incredible sense that they wanted to give you everything. So my time had ended with them, and I was there for I stayed with them for quite some time. And I said, I've got all my research that I need to do. I've watched your performances. They're wonderful. They're incredibly moving. And they asked me to stay for 2 days. And I had no clue why. Why would you want me to stay for 2 more days? I've been here, I've watched your things. I mean, we're friends, but for why exactly 2 days? The man worked as a day laborer, and he worked digging mud. He worked digging mud out of a pit where he made bricks, and he didn't make barely any money a day, nothing, really nothing. And after those 2 days, I come into their home, and they had made me dinner. Before we were just eating rice. That's all the family could afford, rice, and I had to pick the stones out of the rice. He had made me a curry dinner, tea, and just a really wonderful dinner that would cost more. And the thing is, I was blown away by that. And then he brought out an apple for me. And that apple, in West Bengal, an apple is almost impossible to get. And he knew that I was an American, and he knew that we ate apples. and that was the greatest thing he could give me. That was at least 2 days worth of his work. I mean, and he wanted to give that. So, actually, when I went back and I thought about that, this work has a lot to do with the intellectual capacity of someone and building that. And I think it takes a degree of intellectual capacity to be that good of a human being. And all of these people that I saw, they have that. And for me, that's what this work could do. It brought that love into the community that had been divided by political, economic issues. And it brings it forward. It creates a community, and it creates an ecology. And so that was probably the best meal I'll ever have in my life. And I'll never have anyone that is even close. So, I mean, again, in my letter, I wrote this to the donor as a thank you. And, not only did they give me that, the donor did also. And so I didn't properly thank the donor. So I want to take this time again and thank them.
Questions? I mean, I have a string of questions, but I get a chance to talk to you guys afterwards. But I did want to ask one question, and something that Marisa, you said that Chennai has the largest population of mentally ill in India, and I'm wondering if you could just talk to the fact of whether that statistic really rests in the fact that the Bunyan is doing this work, which allows us to document the degree of or the number of people who are suffering from mental illness, or is there, so that we actually have the statistics? Because, I mean, having just lived 1.5 years in Delhi, the same issues that we struggle with in the U.S. with homeless populations, where so much of that has to do with lack of adequate support and infrastructure for mental health. I was wondering if you could just talk about that statistic a little bit, and whether you think that it's coming out of the actual work that Bunyan is doing, or is there something about Chennai that we need to know that we don't already?
Yeah,
Please come to the speaker if you would.
So yeah, I mean, that's a great point, a really important analysis point to bring up. So I definitely do agree with you to a certain extent. I definitely think that this probably lies somewhere in the lack of documentation of mental illness in other aspects or other areas of India. One thing I do want to note is that the conference I sort of mentioned to you guys briefly that I was able to attend and meet the doctor that I went and visited in Delhi. So in that conference, there were psychologists and psychiatrists from around India, and I actually did get to meet psychologists from actually many of the cities that many of them went to, and their main organizations like to help the mentally ill in that area. So actually, another major part of India that has a lot of mental illness, and this is obviously according to, with documentation problems in mind, is actually the very, very south of India. So they actually have an almost equal amount of mental illness in comparison to Chennai. Now, obviously, the Bunyan is the first organization of its kind in India to do anything with mental illness. So your point about, documentation is completely valid. But pretty much what I've been hearing or what I heard, and this is obviously in the context of not necessarily people from higher aspects of socioeconomic status, but this is more people who are on the outskirts with less financial resources. It's more the urban cities. So more of the urban cities have higher rates of mental illness from what I got from my time there. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question a little bit.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think we need more organizations doing the kind of work that the Bunyan is doing. I guess in the interests of time, I'm going to just take an opportunity. I do, once again, there's a lot of work that goes into making these internships or this fellowship program possible. A very significant aspect of our ability to do this, of course, is the very generous donation by our donor, but also the Center for South Asian Studies, and particularly Zilka Joseph, I know has been a key resource, and this wouldn't be possible without her work. So she stepped out of the room, unfortunately, but I want to thank her. And I really want to congratulate each one of you on both being intrepid enough to take up this opportunity and congratulate you on very fine projects that you've put together and for the research that you have done and that you are now disseminating here at the University of Michigan and I suspect beyond. So congratulations to all of you.